Hey, welcome to Sharkfinger. It's Shadow here, and today I'll be walking you through how to make a basic 2D platformer controller in Godot. The first thing we have to do is create a 2D scene by clicking this button. Now we are going to build an environment for our character to run around in, so click the plus in the top left, search for Static Body 2D, and hit Enter. Then we want to create a collision-shaped 2D as a child of the static body, and set its shape to rectangle. Then we want to create a mesh instance 2D as a child of the static body, set its mesh to a box mesh, and scale it up so that it looks the same size as the collider. Then we want to select the static body and change its scale so it becomes a platform instead of a cube. Finally, we move it up a bit so we have our first platform. Now you can duplicate it with Ctrl D and move the duplicates around to form a bit of a level. You can also hold middle mouse and drag to pan the scene view. After that, we need to be able to see the world when we play the game, so create a camera 2D. After you've built an environment for the player to run around in, we want to set up the player node. Let's start by creating a character body 2D. Then, to be able to see the character, you can either create a mesh instance 2D and set its mesh to a capsule, or you can create a sprite 2D and drag an image file into the texture slot in the inspector. Make sure you create it as a child of the character body and scale it up or down if you need to. Also, if you are using a sprite like I am, you may need to go into the texture tab in the inspector and change the filter option to make your character look crisp instead of blurry. Finally, we need to add collision to our character, so let's add a collision-shaped 2D as a child of the character and set its shape to capsule. If you need to, you can use these orange dots to resize the collider. Now that we have a character set up, we need to write the code for how the player works, so let's create a script and call it player. Let's start by creating a script on the character body and clearing it out. Make sure not to delete the bit at the top. Now we need to tell Godot what inputs to watch for, so we need to go to Project, Project Settings, Input Map. Click on Add Action, type Move Left, and hit Enter. Now that we have an action, we need to bind an input to it. We do this by clicking the plus here, pressing the key we want to bind to the action, then clicking OK. Finally, we repeat the few steps we just did to create a move right action and a jump action. Back in the script, we need a place to store how fast we want the player to move and what direction we want to move them in. So let's write private float speed equals 300f and private vector2 movement. Now we want to watch for input continuously and move the player every physics tick. So we want to use the physics process function with public override void physics process double delta. Inside of the function, we want to get what direction to move the player in with movement.x equals input.getAxis, move left, move right, and then multiply it with our movement speed to get the velocity we want to move the player with. Now we apply this velocity with velocity equals movement, and move the player with move and slide. Now, if you save and play the game, you should be able to move the character left and right, but they can't jump and aren't affected by gravity, so let's fix that. First, we need a variable to store the gravity in, so we write private float gravity. Then we want to make a variable to store the velocity we want to have when jumping, so we write private float jump velocity. Now, we want to grab the velocity value from the project settings and store it here. We do this with public override void underscore ready, and then inside the function, gravity equals project settings dot get setting physics/2D/default gravity. Don't forget to cast the value into a float with parentheses float. After that, we want to apply the gravity when the player is in the air. So in physics process, we write if is on floor movement.y plus equals gravity times float delta. Otherwise, we want to watch for the jump input and make the player jump when it is pressed. So we write else if input.isActionJustPressed jump movement.y equals jump velocity. I also forgot to do it earlier, but you have to set the jump velocity up here. I'll set it to -400 for now. It has to be a negative value because when working in 2D in Godot, positive on the y-axis is down. Now if you save and run the game, you should be able to run and jump around the environment. Now there's just one final step in this character controller which not all 2D games use, but it is useful to have a basic version set up. This is to have the camera follow the character around. Back in the script, we need a reference to the camera in the scene, so we add a variable to store the reference with brackets export public camera 2D camera. Then back in physics process, we update the camera's position to be the same as the player's with camera.position equals position. Finally, back in Godot, make sure the character is selected and drag the camera to the slot in the inspector and it should all be set up. You may have to click this hammer button in the top right to make the slot show up though. Now just save and run the game and the camera should be following the player now. Now this is just a very basic character controller. There are a lot of improvements that can be made to this controller which you should at least consider implementing if you are trying to make a full game. I'm working on a follow-up video on a more advanced 2D character controller. Anyways, thanks for watching. If this tutorial was helpful, leave a like. If you want to follow along with my game's progress or want to keep up with any other tutorials I put out, consider subscribing. So see ya and have a good day.